So we've got our experiential entertainment experts up here. They're going to show us and talk to us about how to party with this tech. Take it away, guys.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sophia, and I'll be the moderator for today's panel. I wanted each of the panelists to introduce themselves and just tell the audience why they got into virtual reality and what their story is like. So we'll start with you, Teresa.
Hey, I'm Teresa Duringer, the CEO of Temple Gates Games. I've been doing VR game development for about a year. And I actually got into the industry because my mom is a video game developer. She worked at EA back in the day and has been a huge inspiration. And I've been doing game development for about a decade. Spent a lot of time at Maxis on Spore, SimCity, things like that.
I'm Anush Langovan, and I'm the founder and CEO of Nod Labs. We build gesture tracking and motion control systems. We kind of believe that's the foundation of immersion and interaction with virtual reality or augmented reality. And I got into this space, human-machine interaction, back when we were building Chromebooks at Google, and the biggest pain point was interacting with the device. And then and looking back, there's always been a computing revolution around input. And so the focus was on input and to figure out what the next input medium is going to be. And we're still figuring that out, but we have technology that will enable exploring what it is that we're going to build.
It's very cool. Try it, by the way. My name's Taylor Freeman. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Upload. We're doing a lot of things to sort of support the professional ecosystem for the immersive tech industry. So we have a co-working space. We have a website that puts out a bunch of information and news about the space. We have an academy that we just launched to train developers on how to create VR. And we do events all over the world to just sort of evangelize the technology and help support the ecosystem. I got into VR very seriously when I saw the acquisition from Facebook, started a meetup group, and then the community just was amazing. Anush was one of the first companies to actually come and demo at an event, so it's just been amazing to watch the company grow and the whole industry evolve.
Great.
My name is Japheth Dillman. I'm one of the co-founders and CCO of YetiZen, which is an accelerator and an investment fund for startup game companies. I'm also now the CEO and founder of Clever, CLEVR, which is a new social network. We'll be announcing some things soon. I was the first designer doing AR on the iPhone back in 2009. I toyed around with VR back in the late 80s and early 90s, but it was really early stage. I don't know if we'll talk about the history of that at all. Speaking of Oculus, in Clever, we have Dan Offner, who was involved in the sale of Oculus to Facebook at Clever. So that's what I'm involved now.
And so you said that you started working on AR in 2009, something?
Actually, in 2007.
It's crazy. It's amazing. But we didn't release anything until 2009. It was a game called Tag This. So a tagger is a graffiti artist. You would draw graffiti on your phone, and then you could geo-positional tag it in space. So you could, say, tag the White House or the Golden Gate Bridge. And then anybody who would look through the phone, the camera could see your tag floating in space and that wherever you positioned it. And then you'd have territorial battles over the tags that you would do. What do you think about mobile AR now and how much it's transitioned? I mean, people are using this every day now on Snapchat.
Well, people using it every day. I don't know, the AR devices haven't really hit the market yet. AR, I think, is definitely going to be more mass marketable than VR. But VR is really a stepping stone to get to AR. I think AR is where we're going to be. But VR is kind of a necessary tool to get to that place.
What about you, Teresa? So you build games for virtual reality. Do you think that one day you'll be building games for augmented reality? What are your thoughts on the industry?
Yeah, I think that AR is definitely going to be huge. It's not there yet as far as just the developer participation, and I think a big reason for that is that dev kits are not out. So if you have dev kits out there for VR platforms like you have for the Vive and the Rift and the Gear and other headsets, people are going to be making lots of content. That's going to drive a market. It's not quite there for AR. I'm excited about it, but I think it's less of a one-to-one proposition as far as what are you going to make. Like going from video game development into VR video game development, it's a smaller jump, and so it's more obvious how to tackle the problem.
So you mean more obvious because games are already in 3D spaces, and it's not like you still have to overlay things in the background, just like the way that AR works?
Yeah, and I think there's a lot less sort of issues with like optics and dealing with different focal depths that you're going to have with augmented reality. In VR, you can do a lot of faking things. So even like just like you would in a regular video game, if you have things at different depths, you're still drawing them on one 2D screen. I think there's a lot of tech stuff that still needs to get figured out with AR.
Yeah, and Anush, you're actually building for AR,
Yes,
correct?
so we are trying to figure out that tech stuff. We are kind of agnostic to AR or VR. In fact, we started with physical reality where we're controlling lights, thermostats, things like that, right? And then it went into virtual reality and then augmented reality. So we look at that as your ambient compute, whether it's fully simulated, whether it's kind of superimposed or otherwise. Our focus is just trying to, be the interface between the human and the machine, right? And kind of like really dial down on making that smooth as possible and kind of extracting as much contextual information as we can from that also, because you may be doing something that doesn't make sense in one context, but in another one it could be a perfect gesture.
I mean, stemming from that, you guys are developing positional tracking for virtual reality, right?
That's correct. So positional tracking is an important part of it, and we're doing it in mobile. And so we want to kind of like do what Vive and Oculus are doing in room scale, but bring it and attach it to the human body so that it's with you everywhere you go, and you get the same fidelity. And it's like I should be able to show you what I experience in Vive right now. I should be able to give you something, and you play with it, and then somebody else tries it without having to go set up through 32 steps of something.
Definitely, very cool. Yeah, so I mean, you shipped on every single device, right? On Samsung Gear, HTC Vive, and Rift. What was your experience building for every single platform? What did you see in the various platforms?
We have the luxury of working on a custom engine that very few people who are doing indie VR game development are doing this, but we've been working on this for, like 6 years. So it just was a good fit. The cool thing about that is that we can do concurrent multi-platform development, so we can develop for all these different headsets at the same time. The problem is then you're dealing with building for your lowest common denominator. In our case, that's the Gear VR, simply because you're working off the processing power of a phone. And each of these different headsets has a unique input system. There's trackpads, there's wands, there's keyboard controls. So, finding a game that's going to map onto lots of different headsets, make sense with different kinds of input controls is really tough. But I think right now we're in a place where we don't know what the winner in this race, hardware-wise, is going to be. So investing everything into one platform can be kind of a risky proposition unless you're getting funding to do an exclusive.
Right. And so stemming from that, do you guys think that developers are still hesitant to jump into virtual reality? And if so, why?
Personally, I'm coming from the indie scene. I've been doing indie for about 3 years before this. And if you're in indie, you're very familiar with the term indie-pocalypse, which is where, with the democratization of game development with Steam and Unity and lots of college tracks that are pumping out kids who have game-specific engineering backgrounds, we're just getting this huge influx, and the market is not necessarily supporting it. So I think a lot of indie developers, especially, are coming to VR as maybe a place they can differentiate themselves.
What about you, Taylor?
I agree. I mean, you see sort of these tentpole development companies that were there right at the beginning, and they've made an incredible name for themselves and are now taking on massive projects. But there is a deficit where there's not a lot of opportunity for people that aren't building those big funded tentpole experiences to come in and actually create sustainable income. So I think with the launch of these platforms recently, there's now a bit of opportunity, but I don't think it's at scale for someone to quit their job at EA and know that they're going to be able to make anywhere near the same amount. So I think there is a little bit more time. I think when PlayStation launches and we see some serious adoption, hopefully in the gaming sector with PlayStation VR, that will also be a catalyst to get more developers in. And with Daydream today, with Google announcing that they're opening it up to every smartphone, basically.
What are your guys' thoughts on that?
I think it's incredible for the ecosystem. We were all sort of expecting it to be an all-in-one headset, which was sort of a letdown, but at the same time, like, they're enabling Android-based VR with VR-ready phones, so they're just democratizing the whole ecosystem, and they're working with partners like Huawei and people overseas. So it's this massive sort of ecosystem that they're building.
Definitely. Do you think that Samsung, like, this is, when I first saw that, I was like, I feel like now Google and Samsung are just head to head, right? Because now a bunch of people are going to have headsets that will run on the Google Play Store, and Oculus was like fighting so hard to take that ownership. And so now we introduced another player into the market where it's like, well, now I have to ship on Google Play, Samsung Gear, Rift, Vive. What do you guys think about?
So I think as far as the development itself, Unity solved a lot of those issues to deploy to multiple systems. But then you're talking about different inputs
Right.
for the different devices. I think that mobile really opens up the mass market, obviously, and dedicated devices are a much harder sale. So you have to really have the content that pushes, and the content's not quite there yet. And it's always the chicken egg problem. You know, developers are nervous to get in because the devices aren't there. People are nervous to buy a device because the content's not there. And so who's going to move first?
Right.
It's going to happen, and people who are in early are going to be rewarded, hopefully, and not die away. But it's not an easy problem to solve. And the fragmentation is a big issue, but luckily, you know, Unity's at least solved a big portion of that problem for us.
definitely.
I think the part of Google's announcement is similar to in 2007 when everyone was expecting the G phone, and then it was like Android, and everyone was like, oh, what is this thing,
Yeah.
right? And 5 years later, you look at it and it's like, oh, that made sense,
Right.
And so that's how we look at Daydream, you know, a few years down the road, where even the input part, we build input controllers
Right.
as the first product, but even though we do tracking in general, the input and to everyone's, you know, kind of like biggest issue is like the trackpad, or is it a wand, or is it something else? Even that is going to be like abstracted away, where you can choose what you want to use. And if you look back into how the PC market even works, you'll use your keyboard for email, you'll use your mouse for pointing, you'll use Whatcom something for something else, right? And so you'd get those options, but you'll have content that's really good at something, and that requires a special kind of input, even though it may not be as mass market. So what gets bundled in the base device is going to be important, because that's what developers would like to target, because you know the
Right.
potential
And
for it.
more than the input, but also the demographic of users. They're more the enthusiast users who are willing to try and experiment. And that also makes it a bit of a challenge when designing for VR and AR. You're not only, you know, teaching someone how to play your game, but now you're teaching them how to use this device for the first time. And then everybody's interpretation of how to use that device is different. So the learning curve just becomes enormous with AR and VR. And until we have a bit more established kind of unified approach to how to onboard new users into these products, and you know, with the fragmentation of all the different products, it's going to be some time before we see more natural experiences
Right.
for a first-time user to pick it up.
Do you find when you guys are building your virtual reality products that you're building for the enthusiasts because they already know how to use it, or you try and educate people about like, this is how you swipe, or like, this is what you do? I mean, I know Bazaar has a really good tutorial that I've done many times. But I feel like a lot of people haven't adapted the tutorials, and like budget cuts, for example. When I first tried it, I was so lost, and it wasn't until I went to GDC where there was somebody literally talking me through the game that I finally understood. Okay, this is how you use it. What do you think is going to happen there?
Well, oh, go ahead. I definitely think that every person who develops their first VR game bites off so much more than they can chew, because they think, okay, VR, oh my gosh, I can do all of these different things. And then the problem is your user doesn't know how to interact with anything that you've put in your game. I've seen that over and over and over again, because you can be looking any direction. It's really hard to manipulate your user's gaze so that they're looking at the thing you want them to look at. One thing that I realized after developing Bazaar is just to pare back how much you're trying to introduce novelties in VR, because it's going to really overwhelm your users. So what I'm doing now with my next games is bringing things that people are really familiar with from outside of VR, not necessarily porting an existing game, but bringing like IP that has a lot of familiar techniques, so that you can do a shortcut to that advanced strategy Because I think what you got right now is the early adopters for VR headsets, they are those hardcore players, and they want that deep and advanced strategy. But the problem is if you try to develop a game from scratch in VR right now and have that deep advanced strategy, people are not going to understand how to interact with it. So if you can find a way to sort of like shortcut, like for us, that's bringing in IP that people are already familiar with, you can kind of bring that familiarity and get to a deeper thing.
Yeah.
What do you mean by bringing in IP for that specifically?
Like bringing in, I can't talk too specifically about what I'm working on, but bringing in stuff where people already understand some core mechanics of a game so that you can introduce new things in a metered way without having to throw everything at them for the first time.
And we did notice something when we were building demos for our the Nod Ring. We had a game where you could cast spells and you had a lot of gestures that you could do. And we showed it at E3, and we had that, and then another one which was just like a modification of the Unity Nightmares thing where there were bunnies walking by, and you just had to shoot them. And the one with gestures, once you explained it and people got it, then they were like, oh, I could do this, and I do this, and then they like immersed themselves for like an hour. Whereas the bunny was just like, oh, you put this on and you shoot, right? And then they got that, and then that was the most popular one. The other one was just like, oh, that was just too much to understand, and the amount of people who took to that was just like a few percent of what we expected.
So simplicity is key right now.
So I've been making games for 25 years, and really it's in the last 7 to 8 years where we've seen this enormous shift because of the demographic change. Before Facebook, your average gamer was a 15-year-old boy in his parents' basement, and now the average gamer is a 43-year-old mother of 2. And so the demographic has changed enormously. And even though we're on the cutting edge and it's an enthusiast type of market right now, we have to keep in mind if we're truly going to hit that mass market again, we have to adjust to the type of demographic that's going to take this on in mass market. If we're going to mobile devices and turning those into VR experiences, who's the mass market? And what we think we're establishing best practices now likely will not be what they will be in 2 years from now.
I think there will be different demographics. It's if VR and AR is as big as smartphones, you would have it appeal to different segments, and it'll do different things for different people. And so there will be different verticals of like what content is developed and what experiences put together for them, right? So we see where like high precision tracking, sure, it's good for gaming, but we have people who want to explore CAD models or real estate, like when you do renovations to kind of like open a door and kind of experience those things. And so and those people are like not gamers. You just tell them take this and you can open the door this way and do this, and then they're like, oh, doing that all the time, right? So so I think it's that's the exciting part of VR and AR, where it's similar to the PC or smartphone and what's coming next. It's a new medium that I don't think we've figured out yet what the hardware and the technology pieces are going to look like, but we just know like the core components that are showing promise.
Yeah, definitely. And so Taylor, you guys see a bunch of people come to your site all the time. What does the demographic look like, and how has it changed in the past year?
So it actually hasn't changed a lot in the past year, which is interesting. It's regrettably like 95% men.
No.
And we actively try to find ways to attract a female audience and diversify, but heavily, male dominated. And the average age is like 24 to 37.
Wow.
It's like our key. So when you talk about finding your niche market, it's dudes that are 30, pretty much. But I do see that sort of evolving and changing in the future, because if it doesn't, then
Right.
Problem.
Yeah.
it's a problem.
Yeah.
And I think that will come with more accessible platforms that enable sort of productivity-based, task-oriented work. So things that you couldn't do without a laptop, now you can't do without an immersive device. That's when I think the mass market shift will happen. And
I know we're kind of spending a lot of time on this issue, but I think as we move more towards AR as well, where it's more natural gesture-based and not so much control input-based, you're going to see the mass market adoption as well. And again, that's why I'm a big believer of AR over VR.
Yeah.
But I think VR is a necessary stepping stone to get to the AR experience.
So my one problem with just gestures is that I don't have the feedback. And so, I mean, I'm so used to having Vive controllers or just having some sort of feedback. And then when you do Leap Motion Orion, which is this amazing technology, but then you're like, you hit a box and you're like, did I really hit a box? And like your brain is like, I didn't feel the box, so you probably didn't hit the box. So like, what does that mean for AR and everything that you're talking about?
I think that's going to be, this is going back to the keyboard and mouse kind of experience, right? I think if you've tried the HoloLens, the gestures there is really good, just like the Leap Motion Orion. But it's good for certain tasks, and if you go through the gesture dictionary and the tutorial, you can get the click very well, you can get the pointing very well. So provided you do that, it's almost like 100% that I can select something, I can bring something up, and it's very immersive. But going back to your point of the tactile feel and like needing that control, that's going to be required for certain tasks. If it's a lean back mode where you're going through your Netflix library and you want to select a movie, perfect, gestures will work. But then there's going to be that part where, oh, I want to point, I want to do some work, I want to interact with the model, where you don't want your hand up here and you want it to be here. And so that's where positional tracking is important, because you need depth too. And that's part of what we work on, and bringing that to a completely wireless and completely mobile solution is what we're working towards. And I think it'll exist in a good harmony between gestures and controls, just like keyboard, mouse, and touch. There will be gestures and controllers, 6-DoF controllers that exist. And whether it's AR or VR doesn't really matter. I think that's going to be kind of independent of that.
Yeah.
No, I don't see the handheld devices even solving the issue entirely either. I was playing with the Vive yesterday on a game. Somebody had a drum set, and you would hit the drums, but you would actually go through it. You'd hear the sound, but you didn't have that haptic feedback. So even though I had controllers in my hands, I didn't have the haptic feedback. So maybe they need to tap directly into the brain and give me that stimulus.
Yeah, like, give you that like jolt.
Yeah, jolt. We'll get there.
There is another solution for that, and that's positional haptics.
Yeah.
And so it's not just that your controller would go through this, but it's when it hits a virtual object, it gives you a torque this way, giving you a force equal to what that object is. And that technology, and we have some prototypes of something similar, but that would really enable you to be like, oh, when I hit something, you're going to feel that force. Or when you shoot a gun, you'll get a recoil that's like much more strong on, opposite to where you're firing. And so that's going to be an important piece. But if you can tap into your brain, that's great.
What made you decide to build a ring? Like that was the first product. Like, how did that evolve? Why not a bracelet?
Yeah, so when we started, we kind of knew the problem, right? As I said, human-machine interaction, and we were focused on the Internet of Things, if you will, which 3 years ago we thought it'll come then, but I know when
Google Home just came now.
Yeah, well, it'll take its time, right? But so we wanted people to be able to control their surroundings, point to a light, turn that on, turn that off, or whatever that is, right? And that's smart devices. Our basic assumption was if I did that, my dog knows I'm pointing there, but why doesn't my computer know that I'm pointing there, right? And so that was what we were trying to like start with, and we wanted to make something that doesn't get people involved with like thinking about, oh, I have a ring and I'm looking at the ring and I'm going to interact with that ring and it's giving me a notification. It's more about like interact with your world around you.
Yeah.
And so we wanted people to look up and like, oh, point to that, do that, whatever that smartness is on the other side. And we wanted to make it as small and simple. And we found the place that we could be most expressive in the body, which was your index finger. And so we kind of like wanted to tap into that, and that's how we started with the ring. Of course, we kind of evolved with the market. We wanted to bring the ring into VR and give locomotion, which is kind of like the Daydream controller, but we did that last year with the backspin. But now we've kind of like moved beyond that, and the form factors and the technology we're talking about and thinking about is to solve exactly what would this new kind of control mechanism look like. It could be a hybrid of gestures and physical devices that you hold. But fundamentally, humans are good at like learning something where the mouse, it's actually pretty unorthodox, where you're moving something here and it's moving in a different plane here, right? But the moment you use it and your brain makes that connection, you're like, okay, I get it. And then you move this, and same for touch, right? And so we need to find those little primitives that we would lock into for VR and AR, and then we define technology around it, and then we define like the form factors around it. So it may be a ring, it may be something else. We don't know what it is, but we just got to like learn and iterate along with the content so that we get feedback from the end users on what it is.
Do you think that any sort of VR UI has been set in stone already, or everything is just still iterative?
There's some things that it's fun to see them becoming standardized. I wouldn't say that this is standardized yet, but it's evolving into that point where people used to use like a straight vector to teleport. And sometimes you'd see like a little circle on the ground, sometimes you wouldn't. And now they're like doing arc-based teleportation is like the rage. So you go and you have an arc that drops a circle on the ground, and that's actually probably the thing that I've seen actually become more standardized. But then also there are people, just to go back to the very first points of the talk, like inventing new ways of interaction that like, when you think about opening a door in a video game on an Xbox, it's pretty much like you press A, right? Or you press X, or whatever the key button is. And then now with VR, it's natural, right? Like if you're opening a door, you'd assume you'd want to actually reach out and open it.
Right.
Maybe that's right, maybe it's not. But I think it affords just thinking, how would you do it in the real world? And starting there. And then like if that doesn't work for whatever reason, then iterating.
Yeah, and figuring it out.
I'm coming into that so much with the game design that we're doing and what I'm seeing in the games that are out there, because like you said, like there's this loss of abstraction. So we're so used to these video games where you click a button or you interact in this very abstract, symbolic way. And now in VR, you kind of pull that back and you have like the direct ability to manipulate a doorknob to open a door. And the thing that I'm seeing is game developers are like, wow, of course I want to do that very natural motion. But the problem is our players have been so indoctrinated with the fact that you should be clicking a button to interact with something that people just really have such a hard time coming back to like, how would you interact with this thing? And so like one example from one of our games is we had like this nodding your head to accept a quest or shaking your head no to reject it. And a lot of these kind of more immersive behaviors, and we actually like pulled them out of the game, which was really sad, but like it was just through playtests, it was just much more successful to put a stupid button in there. And that's because the standards are just starting to kind of like emerge, and we're seeing so many people trying different things, experimenting. There's just this like bouquet, this bloom of all these different things. But nothing has been, in my mind, I agree with you about like the locomotion starting to get standardized with the teleportation, but there's still so much that hasn't been. So it's kind of a struggle as a developer to want to do something really cool and then have it just not. No one.
I remember in Bazaar, I was playing the game, and then there's monkeys that throw bananas on your face. And for like, I think like a minute later, I was like, why hasn't this just dissolved? And then I think I asked them, they're like, oh, you have to shake your head, like obviously, to get the bananas off of your face. And I was like, that would have never come to mind. So I totally understand when you say like, just the simple things that you would normally do in real life, just like shake your head or like touch your face to get it off. You're like, but I'm in a game, that can't happen.
Yeah, I think there's like two parts to it. One is VR and AR kind of give you this immersion of like real life, one-to-one sensual, simulating every sense that you can potentially have, from treadmills to like running, and so that's like everything one-to-one. And then gaming until now has been on the other extreme, where with my thumb I can go conquer this whole land that exists like so far away. So now we have to like reconcile this, where it's like, okay, do you really want to just do this and go through the whole game, or do you want to go open knobs and kind of do that? And that'll kind of like separate itself into two content categories, in my opinion. And I'm not a content expert, but where one would become, it's more focused on like a enhanced experience for the current generation of like FPS and things like that. And then there's the other ones, which is about experiences, and it's like, oh, you can feel this way and you do this or you do this, and it's about human motion and how that's accurately represented there. And I'm sure there's a happy hybrid in between, but how those things evolve, it'll be very interesting to see.
And I think it will be the evolution. Like, I feel like I'm starting to think of my community of players as one sort of like, learning organism. And it's like, and not just our games, but like all the VR games out there. And like, we will get to that place, I think, where there's the really extreme immersive input systems, but we just have to gradually teach and train and form the standards.
So I think we have to be cautious as to how far we want to take the realism and how much is escapism. You know, like if I want to fly, do I want to flap my arms or, you know, exhaust the player, or do I want to let them fly by moving a toggle around? You know, like the games and media and entertainment is a form of escaping reality, but at the same time we're replicating the natural motions that we're doing. And where do you draw the line? I think it's still going to emerge where that line is drawn.
Yeah, definitely. And do you guys have a favorite experience on any of the headsets right now? Do you want to talk about?
Oh my gosh, my new obsession is Intern Astronaut. I don't know if you guys have played that. It's like, kind of reminds me of a cross between Space Team, which is that awesome mobile crazy game, and like Job Simulator, and they just do crazy controls.
I like Light Spirit, and it's a game. It's not a game. It's an experience, right? It's on Vive, and it's, you have this like kind of ghost-like thing, or it just comes and interacts with you, and based on what you do, it kind of learns and does some things to you.
Oh, cool.
And one of the funny things is we asked our product manager to try it, and he's like, wait, where is the, like, what do I do? Do I shoot it? Do I do this? Or do I do this? And our marketing lead, she tried it, and it was an experience. And she's like, oh, yeah, I do this. And if I tickle it too much, it, like, giggles, and it does this. And, you know, and you're, like, exploring something versus, you know, coming at it from a game where, oh, do I shoot this thing? Or,
Right.
like, how do I whack it? Or,
Like,
you
tell
know,
me the objective. I need to
yeah,
know.
there's no objective, and the objective is to like just kind of meditational, if you will, right? So it's like good to like see that experience in like in different people's faces in just one experience, where you know somebody wants to shoot it up and somebody wants to like experience it, right? So,
Yeah.
I can't sit here and say I have one favorite experience simply because everything's so new that there's a lot of inspiration that can be taken from a lot of sections of games. So interaction mechanics, ways of experiencing space, ways of experiencing time. One consistency I'll say that has sort of emerged for me is experiences that are like non-predeterministic, experiences that have unlimited opportunity for creation, essentially. So something like the tilt brush or something like the wave, places where you can go in and every single time you can have a unique creative experience. Those are the things I find myself coming back to. Mm-hmm. But I also really love just games that are exploring new mechanics, like Blarp is a really
is
cool
amazing.
one.
Kabibo is amazing.
It's like you just shoot this ball and it like bounces off the walls and it's all beautiful and colorful, and you try to collect as many balls as you can, just something that could never work in real life. The other one that I really love is Bow Slinger, where you have a bow and arrow and you pull an arrow out of your quill, and when you pull back, you get this amazing sense of haptics, and you can fire it off, and it's very natural, and people that are like good archers come in and it's
I mean,
obvious.
don't you have a crossbow in the office?
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, we have a lot of Nerf guns in the office. But yeah, I think right now it's important to take inspiration from a lot of experiences and just see sort of what's engaging and surprising and delighting people in each thing.
I mean, I agree. There's a variety of pieces from different content that you can pull from. But one thing that surprised me more than anything else, last week I was at a conference, and AT&T had a booth, and they had some stupid marketing gimmick where you could put on Oculus and see some marketing thing. But so my first VR experience was a game called Pterodactyl Nightmare. And I don't know if you remember this. I don't know how old you are on the stage. I look young, but I'm a little older than I look. I think it was in the late 80s, or might have been the early 90s. And it's a round platform you stood on, and you put on a VR headset, and you had a gun, and these vector art pterodactyls would fly in, and you'd shoot them. But it was so bad, and the experience was so disjointed, you know, and Lawnmower Man came out. But I put on the headset and at this conference last week, and it was vector art, but it was fully immersive. And for the first time, I realized we're here. And even though it was just a stupid marketing demo, I was fully immersed in the world that they put me in. It was like kind of like a Tron-like experience. But it no longer did I feel like we're shoveling in, you know, an unnatural experience into these devices just because it's cool and I'm an enthusiast and I want to see something nifty. It felt like I was really there. It was just kind of mind-boggling.
But did this incorporate haptics in any way? Like what?
No, it didn't. It was just kind of played through. You could look around and explore, but
Cool.
no haptics.
It's just for the sake of the audience here, there's some stuff, we were talking about this right before we came on, like games that are sort of stimulating the mind and are sort of helping with different things. Like There's a company here, Cerebrum, that's demoing. They're doing like cognitive, like brain training. So you go through all this brain training, and you come out, and it teaches you focus, teaches you attention, like all this stuff. And then things that are treating phobias, for example, like things where you can actually give people really incredibly effective exposure therapy in a way that's like being proven to be much more efficient than traditional methods, and it's already working, it's already curing people and helping. So there are experiences across the spectrum. Like this isn't just a gaming device, this is a really powerful tool.
And it crosses over to the real world. There's a video that Teresa posted on Facebook on an airplane where she put on the VR goggles and could conquer the fear of being on a plane in the real, in the real world. And so it's really neat to see how they bleed over between the escapism and the reality.
What is the game that you play on the airplane?
When I first noticed this effect, I was playtesting Bazaar, just using my time on the airplane, and I noticed this ridiculous thing where, I mean, this might be a little TMI, but like, I get so freaked out on an airplane, like my hands will sweat bullets and my heart's racing, and I have a hard time even sleeping leading up to a flight. And VR, I think what was happening is, having that retinal monopoly where, every single photon that's coming into your eye is really reflecting a game world or a movie world, something you're electing to be in. So if I'm on a flight and I'm looking at, like a Game Boy or my phone or a book, I still see the context of the airplane around me. But being in VR, I was able to very fully kind of take myself out of the airplane experience. So it's sort of the opposite of exposure therapy, which is the traditional treatment for phobia. I was able to really negate something that I didn't want to expose myself to and elect what stimuli were coming into my brain. And that was just phenomenal. That's sort of my secret agenda with the new game I'm working on, is trying to help me with my fear of flying, but it's also a really cool game. So, yeah.
That's awesome. What do you guys think about these fully haptic bodysuits, things like Axum VR are creating?
I think they're awesome, but not really accessible to the mass market at this point. It's like you can have insane experiences across the whole spectrum of anything you can imagine. So I think it's exciting. It's a new sort of experiential realm to explore, but I don't see it becoming anything mainstream for a while, if ever.
And I think all we need right now are small bits of feedback, bits of stimuli to know when you've interacted with an object, to just give your brain that stimulus. The full body suit is a little beyond what we need, really, to feel immersed.
Yeah, I mean, you use something like Subpack, which is just like a backpack subwoofer that, for example, if you're doing like the Mount Everest experience, you feel the wind blowing across your chest, and it's enough to actually immerse you and convince your brain.
Do you find that after using things like the Subpack now, when you do those experiences, you're like, oh, I wish I had a Subpack on? Or it just depends on the experience?
It depends on the experience, but I think it does enhance. If the goal is to really plug in and really be there and really have the most pure experience possible, then it definitely helps.
Yeah, I think we should look at it from the perspective of not whether we need it or not, whether it's accessible or not is the question. Because you could have that in a theme park, and we've been doing that for decades, right? So in a theme park where you mount something up and I want to go experience this. Cool, 20 minutes, I'm done. And I don't want to buy a suit, keep it, use it for 20 minutes and put it in the drawer, right? So that's how I look at it. So it's cool, but irrelevant in the mass market. And, but we should invest time and understand it, because there will be use cases for that, whether you're simulating a flight to Mars or whatever it is, right? So the technology pieces we should demarcate, and we should invest time in that. And then the applications of it may be niche or it may be mass market. That would be a separate discussion.
I think one of the coolest things I've seen is the perception neuron, which is the real-time motion capture. You can do the first person, get your avatar in the game, really lining up with what your body is doing in a cool way. I'm so excited about these things, but as a developer, it's really hard in VR hitting your market and then dividing it even further by saying, okay, I'm going to double down on this particular kind of one-off, haptic system. It's so tough to justify that cost-wise right now.
Right, definitely. So stemming from that, is there something that you've learned in the past couple of months that you wish you would have known a year ago when it comes to developing VR, developing community?
I just think everything that you think is going to be, just don't ever design, if you're in here and you're VR designers, don't design for what VR can do. That will just take you in these weird rabbit holes. You should just design to solve problems. Like, one thing I did was, I was in one of my first VR experiences. I was so immersed and I wanted to step forward into this world, but I ran into a coffee table. So in my VR game, I designed it around a flying carpet so that it teaches the user, don't move your feet. Stand here, you're gonna get to explore the world. You know, the decisions that I've made that have been based on like, oh, what can you do? You can put your UI in the sky, or you can have nodding and shaking your head. Those never are the most successful things because they result in these sort of like gimmicky novelties that are very forced. So I wish I knew that going in.
Yeah, I think mine's more general in the sense that there's a lot more that we don't know about VR and AR or the next computing shift, and be prepared to like, you know, hunker down past the hype cycle, right? Because that's gonna come and go, and so you want to like aim for what it is that you essentially are doing, right? Look at it 5 years from now. Does this really make sense, or what is it that you're trying to work towards 5 years from now? Because, you know, hardware will come and go, and then content-wise there will be iterations. So you want to look beyond what the current hype cycle is, and aim for something that's like a little more, you know, ready for when it's prime time for the technology.
Yeah, that's exactly my thought as well. And also just thinking about tools and building something that's actually functional and productive in VR, I think, is a really important stepping stone that we need to hit with the industry to have that Lotus 1, 2, 3 type experience emerge that you just simply can't do without an immersive piece of technology.
Have you seen anything like that yet?
There's a couple things. Nothing that I think is that like golden shining star. I mean, there's one called Envelop VR. There's one called Big Screen VR. There's some applications like the Wave that allow you to create music and things, but it's still not quite to that, like we were talking about, the 10x improvement to where like you simply can't do it without it. I think, but that's really the core focus. Like we need to find things that you just simply cannot do without the tech, and then it'll start taking off.
Is there a Lotus 1, 2, 3 VR?
I don't know, there should be. You just grab information and put it. Yeah.
Do you?
I would say not throwing the player completely into the experience of full mechanics right off the bat, but get them used to the experience of VR and then slowly stagger the mechanics and the learning curve, because it's, again, it's such a steep curve. Just expose them to like one mechanic at a time and really gently ease them into the experience. This is usually going to be the first time they're trying VR, first time they're trying your approach to how to do the mechanics. So just give a much more gentler curve on that learning cycle.
Cool. So we have time for 1 or 2 questions. Does anyone in the audience have something that they'd like to ask? Anyone? Okay, you.
It was Sienna.
Hi, you were talking about interfaces and you're talking about the typical console, but we've had Wii and Kinect and, you know, some other devices that were very mainstream. Don't you think that those have gotten players used to other kinds of interfaces?
I think they were cool, but I don't think they became the touchscreen of the smartphone revolution, if you will. So the Kinect really, you know, brought about like the immersion with cheap hardware, but the content that exists for Kinect, you know, it's probably like 10, 20 games or experiences, but they're not. It's not something that people would invest time in. And same for the Wii. Wii, you know, the initial fun factor. I think there's a lot of credit to Nintendo for even getting that to a point where, you know, there was at least a few good like tennis games or things that you could do. But after you cross that threshold, then there's no more pull in the market for the equivalent of the Lotus 1 to 3, right? So I think there were good experiments in the evolution of where input would go, and so you know, we should learn from them and then inform our next experiments as a community, and we'll build on top of that. But I don't think they've shed enough light to say, oh, that's the next mouse, right?
When you say mass market, look at the demographics of that. You know, with
the Kinect, maybe there's 20 million devices, and of that, a few experiences, and how many of those users are using the Kinect. It's a relatively small audience, maybe 5 million people are actively using a Kinect, and that's a pretty hardcore demographic, enthusiast, young male demographic. Whereas who's using a mobile device, who's doing mobile games, it's in the billions. The order of magnitude isn't even comparable. So I still think we haven't truly experienced the device penetration with these types of interactions.
Yeah, I guess if there's a killer app game or something that might bring these new interfaces in. Could I just ask one other thing about?
I think actually we have to stop,
Oh.
but if you want to come up to us after,
Okay,
you're
I
really
will.
welcome to. So yeah, thank you to the panelists.